Hello again, today from Fox News headquarters in New York. The 2018 midterm campaign has finally reached the endgame. At stake, whether Republicans will hold on to control of Congress. Should one or both chambers flip, Democrats will be able to block much of President Trump's agenda and launch investigations into his administration. But if the GOP keeps its majorities in the House and Senate, and that would buck traditional losses for the president's party in the first midterm, well then, Mr. Trump will be in a more commanding position than ever. We begin our coverage of the battle for Congress 2 days out with Peter Doocy on the campaign trail in Hialeah, Florida. Peter.
Good morning, Chris. Democrats believe they have built the biggest battlefield for the House in a decade, and party leaders say it's about to pay off.
We will win.
Democratic challengers everywhere are sticking to a single focus: health care.
1 week to prove we are an Iowa that steps up for our neighbors with pre-existing conditions.
Hey! Vulnerable Republicans believe that if there's one issue that helps them hold the House, it's the strong economy.
Keeping the economy going, trade is a big part of that.
A critical constituency in the battle for the House: women.
I do see some falling off among the college-educated women.
President Trump is more outwardly optimistic.
It looks like we're doing okay in the House. We're going to have to see.
The Senate map is tougher for Democrats, especially the 10 defending seats in states Trump won.
It really comes down to is who do you trust?
A huge focus for Republican Senate hopefuls: immigration.
You mean the people of Texas want a wall? You mean the people of Texas want to stop the caravan?
President Trump has made repeated visits to red states with Democratic senators for sizable rallies.
Hello, Montana. I said I was coming back, and I'm back.
Rallies some of those Democrats are trying to laugh off.
He's been here so often, he must be building a golf course.
Millions of people in places like Florida have already voted, so Republican Senate candidate Rick Scott is out here taking orders and asking for votes before Tuesday. Chris?
Peter Doocy reporting from Florida. Peter, thanks for that. Joining me now, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, who leads the Democrats' effort to take back control of the Senate. Senator, this was always going to be a tough year for Democrats. You're defending 26 seats this year in the midterms, while Republicans only have 9 Senate seats up, and 10 Senate Democrats are running in states President Trump won in 2016, many by 20 or 30 points. So realistically, don't Republicans have a better chance of not only holding their majority, but adding to it than you do of flipping the Senate?
Well, Chris, you're absolutely right. This is the toughest political map any one party has faced in 60 years. And if you were to have asked people a year and a half ago where we would be, you would not even be asking the question about whether or not we have a path to a Senate Democratic majority. The answer is we do have a path. It is a very narrow path, as you indicate. But the fact that we're as competitive as we are is a real testament to our senators and our candidates who have always said that their North Star is standing up for the people of their states. That's their first and foremost priority, and that's what they've been doing.
All right, so give me your 2 best chances to pick off Republican Senate seats. Where are they? And in fact, isn't at least one of your Democratic senators, Heitkamp in North Dakota, isn't she in trouble?
Well, first of all, never count out Heidi Heitkamp. People did that 6 years ago when she was 10 points behind. She won that race. She's less than 10 points behind right now. That's a lesson everybody's learned. Don't count her out. In terms of the Republican seats that are very competitive right now, Nevada, Arizona, Tennessee, Texas, Mississippi may go to a special runoff. And the reason is that you've got Republicans running in all those states who have betrayed their voters primarily on the issue that is at the top of mind for voters around the country, which is health care issues and taking away protections for people who have pre-existing health conditions.
President Trump is hitting Democrats hard in these final days on immigration and the caravan headed up through Mexico. Here he is on the campaign trail.
A Democrat victory on Election Day would be a bright, flashing invitation to traffickers, smugglers, drug dealers, and gang members all over the world. Come on in.
And the president ran a controversial ad this week about a Mexican who was deported twice, came back into this country, and then shot and killed 2 California police officers. Here's a bit of the president's clip.
Please step out of the hallway.
Break up soon, and I'll kill more.
Senator, I'm sure you don't like the tone, but isn't it working? Republicans in red states say immigration is now a top issue.
I don't think it's working, Chris, because what the president is doing is driving away the independent voters and swing voters and a lot of moderate Republican voters in these swing states. Look, the president says lots of outrageous and untrue things, and there's another example right there. The reality is Democrats are for strong border security. We're against open borders. We're also against separating parents and their children. And it was pretty outrageous for the president to suggest the other day that the United States military would fire on unarmed people and that the military had to tell the president that's not what we do. That's not what the United States military does. But the real thing going on here, Chris, is an effort to change the national conversation from what people wake up every day thinking about, which are their economic circumstances and primarily uncertainty over health care costs and the fact that Republicans for the last 2 years have tried to eliminate protections for people with pre-existing conditions. That remains the top issue on voters' minds despite all the president's efforts.
Well, you talk about the economy and then you segue into health care, but let's talk about the economy because Republicans have a pretty good story to tell there. Let's put up the numbers. 250,000 jobs created in this last jobs report for October. Unemployment at 3.7%. Wage growth the highest since 2009. Isn't that a strong economic record for Republicans to run on?
Well, Chris, I think voters know that the economy was on this upward trajectory long before President Trump was sworn in. We saw growing job growth, lower unemployment, and interestingly, when you look at real wages, real wage growth was stronger in the last term of the Obama administration than in this term so far of the Trump administration. That's because even as wages have gone up, so have costs, like the costs of health care. So for most Americans out there, they're actually not seeing their real wages keep pace. And in fact, they were keeping pace at a faster rate under the Obama administration. And that is why people are focused on this issue of health care and the uncertainty that the Republican plan to eliminate protections will bring.
I got 15 seconds left. Yes or no? Are you going to take the Senate back?
We have too many close races, Chris, and you know it's all about turnout. Here's what I would say. The early vote in states like Nevada and Arizona has been very strong. It does appear young voters are coming out, and it looks like the president's effort to distract voters from the real issues they care about, like health care and like the Republican efforts to take away protections for pre-existing conditions, is not working.
Senator Van Hollen, thank you. Thanks for taking time from the campaign trail to talk with us, sir.
Good to be with you, Chris. Thanks.
Now let's turn to North Carolina. Senator Tom Tillis, vice chair of the Senate Republican campaign effort. So, Senator, let me start with you where I ended with Van Hollen. Are you going to hold on to the Senate on Tuesday night? If so, what's your new majority going to be? And give me your 2 best shots at picking off Democratic seats.
we're not only going to hold the majority, I think we're going to add to it. I believe that states like North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri are all trending in a positive direction. Our incumbents are doing very well. There may be a special election in Mississippi that will take another 3 weeks to sort out, but I'm also confident that we'll have a Republican coming back in that state. The map looks very good to us in about 5 or 6 different states, and Senator Van Hollen knows that. They've got a tough haul, and I think we're going to come out successful on Tuesday.
As I discussed with Senator Van Hollen, President Trump this last few weeks has been making immigration and the caravan coming up from Mexico his top issue. Here he was earlier this week talking about a possible confrontation between the migrants and the thousands of soldiers he is sending to the southern border. Here's the president.
They want to throw rocks at our military fights back. We're going to consider it. I told them, consider it a rifle. When they throw rocks like they did at the Mexico military and police, I say, consider it a rifle.
Now, the president walked that back on Friday, saying he was talking about making arrests of the migrants, not shooting them. But no concerns on your part about the president's rhetoric and some of the actions he's taking on the southern border, potentially turning off independents and moderate Republicans?
Well, what the American people need to know that our men and women in uniform are some of the most disciplined, trained professionals in the history of warfare. They're going to treat those members of the caravan with respect, but the president is right that we have to secure the border. And I think that putting troops down there to make it very clear that we want people who have a legitimate claim to asylum to come through the process and get that asylum granted. This caravan's not the way to do it, and I think the American people are concerned with it. You can see the change in the rhetoric on the part of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle from, well, just let them across the border, to now discussing the president's tactics. I believe that the president is right in doing everything he can to stop the illegal crossing.
Senator, Republicans have a great story to tell on the economy, but the president doesn't seem especially focused on that. Here he is at a rally on Friday.
We have the greatest economy in the history of our country. But sometimes it's not as exciting to talk about the economy, right?
In reaction, a top aide to Republican Speaker Paul Ryan tweeted this almost plaintively: "We're going to spend all day and weekend talking about the strong economy, right?" And Republican Congressman Ryan Costello, who's retiring, accuses the president of political malpractice. Question: are you sure that focusing on immigration over the economy is really the right strategy, the best strategy for Republicans?
Well, I think people are taking 30-second sound bites. I was at a rally here in Charlotte a week ago, and the president spent a good portion of his speech talking about 7 million jobs created, one of the strongest and fastest growing economies we've seen in decades, record unemployment for African-American community, for the Hispanic community. He's spending a lot of his time on that, but when you have to boil it down to 15 or 30-second sound bites, they're going to pick the piece that seems like he's not talking about that. Let me tell you something else. He also spends a lot of time on the stump talking about how we have to protect pre-existing conditions. And it's a false narrative for Democrats to come in and say, if you elect Republicans, we're going to take that away. We're doing everything we can, including myself. I've filed a bill to make sure that we protect pre-existing conditions. If people look at the totality of an hour and 15 minute long speech, you're going to see the president spends the bulk of the time talking about reduced regulations, increased jobs, reduced unemployment, better stature against NATO, taking North Korea and taking China to task on their bad behaviors. All that comes out in his speech.
Well, you have taken us directly in the direction I wanted to go, which is health care, which Democrats are making their top issue. And here's former President Obama on the campaign trail this week.
When I was president, Republicans voted more than a dozen times to get rid of protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Last year, they fell one vote short. One vote. If they win this Tuesday, they'll finally succeed.
Senator, the fact is that the repeal and replace bill, which Republicans pushed repeatedly, significantly reduced protections for people with pre-existing conditions.
Well, Chris, that's actually one of the reasons why I think it was a courageous vote. The first thing we have to do is take out the underpinnings of the Affordable Care Act so that we can put a health care policy in place that's sustainable. What Senator Van Hollen failed to mention about rising premiums over the past few years is that we've significantly reduced the rate of growth. And one of the reasons why that growth has spiraled over the years is because of the Affordable Care Act. We want to replace the Affordable Care Act with a program that will work, that will provide people who have pre-existing conditions with health care, that will allow young adults under the age of 26 to be on their parents' health care policies, but something that will work, because if we continue down this path, we're going to have a health care crisis, not only among those who are serviced by the Affordable Care Act, but the broader health care market in this country is headed for disaster if we don't recognize we've got to fix it.
But Senator, and I've only got about 30 seconds here, I don't want to get too deeply in the weeds, the repeal and replace bill would have allowed states to get waivers from Obamacare and take people with pre-existing conditions and put them in risk pools where they would have to pay a higher premium. And your bill, yes, it says we're going to cover everybody with pre-existing conditions, but we're not necessarily going to cover the condition that they have that's pre-existing. So yes, we'll cover people who have cancer, but we won't necessarily, their insurance won't cover cancer treatment.
Even if some states opted not to cover, or not cover in the way that we would want them to, I think they'd get unelected very quickly. This is a very popular policy with the American people, which is exactly why the Democrats are trying to create this false narrative that people in Washington and the state houses want to take it away. I simply don't see any path either on the basis of good policy or good politics. So people with pre-existing conditions are going to get covered, and our Republican majority that we're going to secure next week is going to work to that end.
Senator Tillis, thank you. Thanks for your time, sir. And we'll be following how the world turns on Tuesday night.
It'll be a great night.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the battle for control of the Congress with just 2 days to go. Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about President Trump's efforts to fire up his base? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question on the air.
Only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits.
We have about 5,008. We'll go up to anywhere between 10 and 15,000 military personnel on top of Border Patrol, ICE, and everybody else at the border.
President Trump upping the ante for how he'll stop that migrant caravan coming from Mexico, talking about sending more troops to the border, changing asylum laws, and even ending birthright citizenship. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume, columnist for The Hill, Juan Williams, co-host of Benson and Harf on Fox News Radio, Marie Harf, and GOP strategist Karl Rove. Well, Karl, let me start with you. Is immigration the best issue for this president to be pushing in the midterms to try to hold on to control of both the Senate and the House?
Well, on Friday, Gallup found that 80% of the American people thought the economy was extremely important. Health care, and 78% found that the economy and immigration were extremely important. So these three issues are all sort of stuck right there. Immigration helps only if the Democrats screw it up. For example, Sinema in Arizona and McCaskill in Missouri both support the president sending troops to the border. On the other hand, in Tennessee, I saw a poll in Tennessee, 62% of Tennesseans are concerned about it, 27% are not. Bredesen, the Democratic nominee, said this is not a problem, and he thereby created a problem for himself. In Texas, Ted Cruz is beating up Robert Francis O'Rourke over the issue.
I love it. He keeps saying Robert Francis O'Rourke because you hate to say Beto O'Rourke.
No, it's a Beto.
Okay.
Beto O'Rourke. I'll say, as you like, I'll use his nickname. Nice. So Rafael Cruz is beating up Robert Francis O'Rourke on the issue of immigration because O'Rourke refuses to say that he opposes those caravans coming across the border. And apparently his campaign provided financial support to the caravan, which may be in violation of U.S. law. But anyway, where the Democrats screw it up, it's a problem for them.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Mike Peterson. Why aren't Republicans driving home the message on the economy?
I'll tell you why.
Pardon?
I'll tell you why.
Well, I was going to ask Marie, but you can go.
Go for it.
You know what? Go ahead.
Yeah.
anger, disappointment, outrage are much more powerful vote motivators than satisfaction. People are no doubt satisfied with the economy, and unless you can scare them successfully into believing that all the good things that have happened in the economy will be taken away if your opponent wins, you may well be better off trying to motivate voters by talking about something that they're angry about.
Do you agree with that? I mean, we always hear peace and prosperity. Clinton, 92. It's the economy, stupid. I guess I'm just surprised, and yes, the president does mention it, the focus on immigration to the exclusion to some degree of the economy.
Well, I think it's an open question whether the Trump 2016 playbook that he's now sort of using as his closing argument will actually work when he's not on the ballot, when there's a lot of independents and women who've had 2 years to get really angry about his rhetoric, and when he doesn't have Hillary as a foil. I think that this closing argument based on immigration, Chris, may help them keep a narrow set of Senate seats, but I think definitely hurts when you're talking about the House, when you're talking about these swing districts. And let's not forget, the tax cuts are still not polling very well. Many people in states and districts that the Republicans need to keep, the tax cuts aren't popular, the tariffs aren't popular. So I don't know whether the closing argument that Trump is using will work. If it does, it will be in a narrow set of places, and I do not think it will keep the House for the Republicans. I actually think it will help deliver the House to the Democrats.
The first midterm election after a new president is historically tough for the party of the new president. Let's put up some numbers. Since World War II, the president's party loses an average of 28 seats in the House in the first midterm and between 2 and 3 seats in the Senate. Juan, how do you think President Trump is doing in trying to break that historic tradition?
Well, I think the one advantage he has is that he has had an unerring base here, and that base is about 40% of the vote, people who approve of his presidency. And when it comes to Republicans, he's up 80 to 90% of Republicans backing Trump. I think it's become the party of Trump. So what he's done, Chris, in this cycle, and you can look at his travel itinerary over the last few days, you can see he's going to red states, and he's trying to excite red Trump voters. And that's where the immigration message comes in. That's where he thinks that message has tremendous impact. It does not, as Marie was saying, have tremendous impact, though, with a lot of the white female voters, especially in the suburban areas that are so critical in terms of the House races. I think you'll see a difference there. And on a larger scale, I think if you look at the advertising over the last few days, almost none of it has to do with the economy, which is kind of shocking because, as you pointed out, the economy is doing fairly well. Why wouldn't Republicans be running on it? Instead, you see Republican Senate and House candidates actually following the president's lead and going with the immigration, red meat, culture war issue. And again, it might work with the base, but it doesn't work with independents.
Let me just say, the one person in this panel who's actually helped elect a president and did it twice is shaking his head. I want to ask you this specific question, though, because at least this is the conventional wisdom out there. It's going to help in red states electing Republican senators. It's going to hurt in the House races, especially in suburban districts with better educated people and with suburban women. True or false?
False. Again, it matters how it gets handled. Is it going to help in some congressional districts? Yeah, there's presidents going to West Virginia 3, which is a battleground district. It's going to help there. Is he going to Illinois 6, Peter Roskam? No, but Peter Roskam wants to make the final issue to be the economy and his stewardship of the economy, his stewardship, what he has done as a congressman to help make a good economy. I think the White House has been very adroit in how it's deployed the president as it comes down the final stages here. Let's be clear. This is not a campaign in these individual states dominated by the issues. I'm not seeing candidates in Nevada or Arizona or Missouri or North Dakota or Indiana running one kind of ad. They're running different kinds of ads that appeal to their individual states, and they tend to be more about the economy and judges than they tend to be about.
No, I think, in fact, what you see is that the ads the Democrats are running are consistent in terms of message discipline on health care.
Right.
Health care. And the president can't even go to Arizona, can't go to Nevada.
He's been to both states.
No, but he's not going there. I'm talking about now, the stretch run.
All right. Wait. Gentlemen, I got about a minute left here, and I want to ask the guru one more question. Early voting. We are seeing these historically high numbers. As of Friday, 28 million people had voted early. Question, is it that people are more enthused and intense? Is it just because there's more early voting and more opportunity than there used to be? And to the degree, and you can't get me into the weeds here because I got a minute left.
I got it.
No, but here, is it showing a trend?
Yes. Bigger almost everywhere. 37 states voting early, and we're going to have the biggest turnout in the midterm since 1966, and it's roughly between, like in Arizona, 53% of the 2016 turnout, Florida, 68% of the
And so what's
turnout.
the reason, and who's it helping?
Well, part of it is that it's getting to be easier and people are falling into the habit, but the main driver is people are wildly enthusiastic about coming out and voting, and Republicans are doing surprisingly well. In Arizona, a 7.9% advantage in the turnout in a state that they won last time around by 3.5 points. Florida, a 2.8% swing towards the Republicans in early voting in a state they won by 1.2%. Nevada, a 1.85% swing to Republicans in a state they lost by 2.45 last time around.
I am so glad we did not get into the weeds. But that was great, and it's very interesting because, you know, you always wonder. One last quick question. Is this people voting who would have voted on Election Day anyway and they're just transferring, or is this new voters?
We don't know, but in some places there is evidence that it is episodic, that there are episodic midterm voters. And my sense is if you got this big in the early voting, we're going to see a lot of people who tend not to vote in the midterms show up.
Okay. We have to take a little break here. We'll see you all a little later. Up next, the White House is reimposing sanctions on Iran as it pulls out of the nuclear deal. But some hardliners say President Trump is not being tough enough on Tehran. We'll talk live with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, next. The Trump administration has announced the remaining sanctions that were lifted as part of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal will be reimposed on Monday, one day before the midterms. President Trump drove home the point Friday when he tweeted this photo with the words "Sanctions are coming," a nod to Game of Thrones. Joining me now, live from the State Department, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Chris. Great to be with you today.
You're reimposing, as we said, all U.S. sanctions on Iran, but you're giving exemptions to 8 countries to allow them to keep buying oil from Tehran. Question, why?
Well, Chris, the sanctions that will be reimposed tomorrow are the toughest sanctions ever put in place on the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're aimed at a singular purpose: denying the world's largest state sponsor of terror the capacity to do things like they did this past couple weeks, attempt an assassination campaign in the heart of Europe. These sanctions have already had an enormous impact. We've already reduced Iranian crude oil exports by over 1 million barrels per day. That number will fall farther. There's a handful of places where countries that have already made significant reductions in their crude oil exports need a little bit more time to get to zero, and we're going to provide that to them.
Is it true that you're giving exemptions to 2 of Iran's biggest customers, namely India and China? And do you have a firm commitment that within 6 months they will stop all oil purchases? Because there are a lot of experts who believe that India and China are never going to stop buying oil from Iran.
There were a lot of experts, Chris, that said President Trump's policy wouldn't have any impact because it was just the United States and other countries weren't participating. And in fact, we have built an enormous coalition to keep this world safe and to deny Iran money. I'm very confident that the sanctions that will be reimposed this Monday, not only the crude oil sanctions, but the financial sanctions that are being put in place by the Treasury Department and over 600 designations of individuals and companies in Iran, will have the intended effect to alter the Iranian regime's behavior. That's our expectation. It's the reason for President Trump's policy.
But specifically, sir, do you have a firm commitment from India and China that they will stop all oil purchases from Iran in 6 months?
Chris, watch what we do. Watch as we've already taken more crude oil off the market than any time in previous history. Watch the efforts that President Trump's policies have achieved. We've done all of this too, Chris, while making sure that American consumers don't suffer. We've got Brent crude at about the same price it was back in May when the president announced the withdrawal from the JCPOA. That's important for American consumers, and the march to zero continues.
You're talking about how effective these reimposition of sanctions are, but as you well know, there are some people who are criticizing the sanctions you're reimposing and saying they're not tough enough. And let me put this up on the screen. Republican senators Cruz, Cotton, and Rubio plan to introduce legislation to cut off Iranian banks from the global financial network known as SWIFT. And a group called United Against Nuclear Iran tweeted this about your sanctions. Whatever happened to maximum pressure? They caved big time. Mr. Secretary, your response.
Chris, the president's policy of maximum pressure will be fully in place come tomorrow. Watch the Iranians. That's who really understands the importance and the impact of the efforts that we're undertaking. The rial has fallen to 140,000 rial to the dollar. Has had an enormous impact already. And we are working diligently to make sure we support the Iranian people and that we direct our activity towards ensuring that the Islamic Republic of Iran's malign behavior is changed. That's the goal. That's the mission, and that's what we will achieve on behalf of the president.
But how do you respond, for instance, to the senators who are saying, look, we should have cut them off from SWIFT, which is this big financial clearinghouse?
Chris, the Iranian banks that engage in sanctionable behavior will be sanctioned by the Department of Treasury. Period. Full stop.
I understand what you're saying. On the other hand,
well, good. That's great, Chris.
If I may, sir, you've got Senators Cotton, Senator Cruz, Senator Rubio. They're pretty knowledgeable on the subject. They're not persuaded.
Chris, I worked with Senator Cotton. We were the two individuals that discovered the side deals now almost 3 years ago to the JCPOA, these secret side deals. I've been at this in a long time. No one's going to argue that Secretary Pompeo isn't tough on Iran, and no one is going to argue that President Trump isn't doing the same.
Meanwhile, let's turn to another one of your hotspots you're dealing with. North Korea is now threatening to resume its nuclear buildup because they say that the U.S. has not matched them in offering concessions, in this case lifting economic sanctions. They say that they've made concessions and the Trump administration has not followed suit.
Chris, I'll be meeting this week in New York City with my counterpart, Kim Young-chol. We'll have a good opportunity to continue the denuclearization discussions that were set out just a few months back. It seems like a long time ago in news world, but it was just this past June when President Trump and Chairman Kim met and set us on the path that we're on today. We haven't had any missile tests. There have been no nuclear tests. We've had the returns of American remains. These are all good steps. We're continuing to negotiate with the North Koreans to achieve what President Trump set out, the full denuclearization verified by the United States of the Korean Peninsula, and then a brighter future for the North Korean people.
But to follow up specifically, what's your reaction to the Foreign Ministry of North Korea threatening that they're going to resume nuclear activity? What's, one, your reaction to that? And two, is there any possibility that to get them to stop that the U.S. will change its policy and start offering concessions on a kind of tit-for-tat basis, a phased effort by both countries?
Of course, I'm not worried about rhetoric. We've seen this as we go through negotiations. Stray voltage happens to be all around us. We're very focused. We know with whom we're negotiating. We know what their positions are. And President Trump's made his position very clear. No economic relief until we have achieved our ultimate objective.
Let's turn to Saudi Arabia. You met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman about 3 weeks ago about the death of Jamal Khashoggi. And here's what you said after your meeting with the Crown Prince.
Told me they were going to conduct a thorough, complete, transparent investigation. They made a commitment to hold anyone connected to any wrongdoing that may be found accountable for that, whether they are a senior officer or official.
But since then, I don't have to tell you, the Saudi story has kept changing. Do you now think that the Saudi Crown Prince lied both to you and to President Trump with what he told you back then, based on all the evidence that you have gotten since, including the tapes that CIA Director Gina Haspel has heard? Do you now believe that this was a premeditated hit by the Saudi royal family against Khashoggi?
Well, Chris, the Saudis have acknowledged that this was a premeditated attack. The facts that we're finding still are unfolding. We're still working diligently on that. We talk with folks from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia nearly every day to continue those efforts. We've begun to hold some officials accountable. We've revoked visas from 16 individuals that we have been able to identify so far that were in fact connected to that. We'll continue to do that. And as I said that day when I returned, we will hold all of those responsible for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi accountable. And we will do that, Chris, at the same time while ensuring that the strategic relationship between the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, one that has a great impact on the issue we just spoke about, the capacity to deny the world's largest state sponsor of terror, the ability to threaten America and Israel, we will continue to work to maintain that important strategic relationship while holding accountable those responsible for this atrocious death.
Meanwhile, you and Defense Secretary Mattis this week called for negotiations and a ceasefire within 30 days between the U.S.-backed Saudi forces and the rebels that are fighting in a war inside Yemen. There are reports that up to 16,000 Yemeni civilians have been killed in this conflict, and that around 14 million Yemenis are now on the brink, if not already, in famine conditions. Two questions. First of all, are you comfortable with the role that the U.S. has played in backing Saudi Arabia in this effort in Yemen? And secondly, if the humanitarian crisis is so urgent, why allow this to continue for another month, sir?
Chris, we did make a statement this week, Secretary Mattis and I. Frankly, it's nothing new. We have been urging all the parties to come to the table and recognize that there's no military victory that can be achieved in Yemen. We've asked the Iranians to do that too, Chris. Much of the harm that is taking place there comes from the fact the Iranians continue to supply weapons and missiles to the Houthi rebels that are fighting there in Saudi Arabia. They are responsible for the starvation in Yemen as well. We want all the parties under Martin Griffiths of the UN to come to the table, negotiate a solution that ends the very difficult, tragic situation that's taking place in Yemen today.
Secretary Pompeo, thank you. Thanks for your time. It's always good to talk with you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
When we come back, where are we on making nuclear deals with Iran and North Korea? We'll ask our Sunday group when they return next.
Sanctions start on Iran. They're very serious sanctions. They're very big. They'll be elevated from there. But as you know, sanctions are starting on Iran. And, you know, Iran is taking a very big hit.
President Trump determined to bring Iran to its knees and to negotiate a tougher nuclear deal than the Obama administration did in 2015. And we're back now with the panel. Well, Marie, you worked hard as a spokesperson for John Kerry to try to make that deal with Iran in 2015. Now, President Trump, and let's put it up on the screen, has tweeted out this in Game of Thrones style: sanctions are coming. Your reaction to the tweet and to the policy?
Well, sanctions are a very useful tool. They're not a joke, and I obviously don't like this sort of diplotainment that the president seems to engage in with many countries. I don't like the tweet, but setting the tweet aside, these are not the toughest sanctions ever imposed on Iran, because the United Nations and the Security Council will not reimpose sanctions. These are only U.S. unilateral sanctions because they do not like the president's rhetoric, and they haven't seen that he has a concrete plan in place to actually have negotiations to get a better deal. The rest of the world does not support the president. So U.S. unilateral sanctions can only do so much. And we heard Secretary Pompeo could not say that China and India had committed to reducing their oil. I think the president is very good at tearing up international agreements, whether it's Iran or Paris or the TPP, but he has not shown yet that he can actually undertake serious negotiations to rebuild them. And that's why the rest of the world doesn't support him right now.
Brett?
It isn't really quite necessary for the rest of the world to like the policy. The rest of the world is confronted with a choice. They can continue to do business as they have with the United States, or they can continue to do business with Iran. For most countries, that's a very easy choice, even if you don't like it. The United States is by far the big dog on the scene here, and if you choose not to do business with the United States and with its banking system and the rest of it, your economy is going to suffer. And Iran's, of course, is suffering terribly.
But some European countries are all saying somehow they're going to be able to do both, that they're going to carve out some kind of special financial channel. So yes, they can do business with the U.S., but yes, they can also continue because they support the Iran nuclear deal.
They may say that. Let's see them do it. I didn't used to believe this, Chris. I used to think that the United States, without international cooperation and a united front, could not effectively damage a country's economy through sanctions. I think I was wrong about that. I think they can, and I give President Trump and his team credit for understanding that we are by far the big kid on the block.
Juan, the Iran nuclear deal, I think we would all agree, even Marie and her former boss John Kerry, was far from perfect. It allowed Iran, after a number of years, to resume its program. It didn't stop Iran from pursuing and banking terrorism around the world, but at the same time that we have pulled out of that agreement, as imperfect as it is, we are struggling to get any agreement with North Korea.
Well, I think that's the big point of contrast, Chris, is that we had a deal with Iran, as imperfect as you describe it, but one which stopped them from developing nukes. They were, of course, still sponsoring terrorism, as you point out, but stopped them from developing nukes. We cannot get the same deal so far with the North Koreans. And I think this is a point of great concern, because the criticism of President Trump is that he has no real foreign policy expertise, no experience, and that saber-rattling, bombastic talks, Game of Thrones tweets do nothing but harden the hardliners, strengthen the hardliners inside Iran, while weakening the moderate revolutionary forces that we need to engage.
Carl, I'm going to give you a twofer. You can respond to Juan. I also want you to talk about Saudi Arabia, because it is clear now that Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince have clearly lied to us about their involvement and premeditation in killing Jamal Khashoggi. The president, though, feels that our relationship, and you could hear Secretary Pompeo say it, our relationship with the Saudis is too valuable to simply cut off. Is he right?
First, let me deal with Iran. Look, whether it's deliberate or not, the administration has stumbled into a very good policy. The Iranian currency has lost 2/3 of its value. There's a deep divide between European companies and the European Union, with major companies saying, we're not doing business in Iran. Part of that is because of the administration's sanctions. Part of it is because once they got in there, they found that it is a command and control economy in which the bureaucrats are making bad decisions, where resources are being diverted to the Revolutionary Guard, and where there's some structural weaknesses in the economy that make it a very unattractive market. As Britt said, they'd rather do business with us than with a stumbling third world country that's going down, 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 down. So I thought, frankly, exempting the major countries, there's a useful ambiguity to it. What did the administration want to do? It wanted to damage the Iranian economy, not the world economy. It didn't want to have a spike in global energy prices that would hurt the U.S. and advantage Russia. And so they're doing it, I think, reasonably adeptly.
Okay, and how about the way we're balancing our interests in Saudi Arabia?
Look, again, I think they're in the middle of a very difficult situation and managing it adequately. But let's not kid ourselves. The new leader of Saudi Arabia, I think, has damaged himself on the world stage. Sure, we have 16 people that they've now identified as having been involved in this atrocious, horrendous murder, and yet who believes that at the end of the day Mohammed bin Salman was not involved in this decision? How Saudi Arabia maintains its place on the world stage with a leader who is so damaged and whose credibility is so undermined is beyond me.
But Carl, you say manage adequately, that the United States, the Trump administration, is managing this adequately?
I think they are doing an excellent job on it, frankly.
I think we have a standard. Our values. You and I obviously disagree on so much politically. We don't disagree about killing people.
Just disagree on it very quickly, because we've got 10 seconds.
The question, I agree this, do you blow up the entire relationship over this, or do you try and manage this so that you maintain the relationship?
We have to stand for what we believe as Americans.
No.
By standing for those values.
You know what? Let's continue this in the commercial. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday. Up next, big names go door to door looking for votes on the trail. As one of the most intense midterm elections ever reaches the end game, both sides are desperate for any advantage. President Trump is in a final campaign blitz, taking him to 11 rallies in 8 states. But Democrats are pulling out some big guns of their own. With just 2 days left, here's a taste of the action on the trail.
You watch. It's going to be very interesting over the next week.
We will win. We have a bigger victory. The Senate governorships. It's going to be a great night for America.
I think we're going to do well in the House also, but I know we're doing well in the
Vote, mail in your ballot.
I already did.
Oh, that's so good to hear.
I voted for some guy named Mitt Romney.
Oh, good.
There you go. Democrats want open borders, and they want to invite caravan after caravan into our country, which brings crime upon crime.
Don't fall for the okie doke. Don't be bamboozled. Don't be hoodwinked.
I am working closely with President Trump to secure our border, build a wall.
I think this is a distraction from the issues that voters are really concerned about right now.
Their agenda is open borders. Their agenda is illiberal activist judges.
All the big wigs in the Republican Party, they were kind of drooling, chomping at the bit. Because you know what they thought? They thought Missouri was over. Not so fast. Not so fast.
I heard Oprah Winfrey's in the state today.
Hi, Denise. Hi, Oprah.
I'd like to remind Stacey and Oprah, I'm kind of a big deal too.
We're here giving people a reason to go out and vote for something and not just against something. That's why we're going to win.
I think the future is very, very bright here, but you got to have good leadership and you got to have good policies, and that's exactly what I'll bring as governor.
I have a 6-year-old grandson. He says, "Grandpa, how are you going to win the election?" I said, "You get more votes than the other person. It's as simple as that."
And if you haven't already gone to the polls, you got to vote on Tuesday. Please go do it. You'll feel better about the country, and you'll feel better about yourself. And be sure to tune to Fox News Channel for Election Day coverage all day and late into the night. Brett Baer and Martha McCallum will anchor our coverage, including the entire Fox News political